If you're a fan of sci-fi that's more than just laser battles, stories that really get under the skin of a character, then you're in the right place. Make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for more adventures like this one. Now, let's get into it. The Galactic Emperor gave Captain Eva Rostova his pick of the 7-star princesses of the Cerulean Empire, each one legendary for her beauty and power. From the obsidian viewing gallery of the Citadel, 1,000 high-born lords and ladies watched, all of them expecting a grand political merger. And honestly, who could blame them? Before Rostova stood the living goddesses of the Cerulean hegemony. You had Princess Kalia, who could supposedly bend steel with her mind and had eyes that burned with cosmic fire. Next to her was Princess Vesper, whose fleets had smashed the pirate moons of the Outer Rim. One by one, they were introduced, each a blinding beacon of psionic light, a perfect specimen of the genetic and telepathic mastery the Ceruleans were so proud of. But when his moment came, Rostova, the quiet human captain who'd single-handedly held the line at Vega 9, did something nobody saw coming. He walked right past the goddesses of light and war. He ignored the court's whispers and their shimmering displays of power. He kept walking, right past the main dais, and headed for a small alcove where the attendants stood. He stopped in front of the one they kept tucked away in the shadows. He chose the outcast, the one they called Lyra, the void-touched, the broken, and in the deafening silence that followed, he was the only one who knew the real reason why. Lyra just stood there, frozen, her wide, moon-like eyes filled with pure disbelief. The court's whispers quickly became shocked, angry murmurs. The Emperor himself, a creature of immense pride, leaned forward on his throne. His voice, a dangerous echoing whisper, cut through the hall. "Captain Rostova, you have been offered the greatest treasures in this system. You would choose a flaw?" His anger was a physical weight, pressing down on everyone in the room. Rostova didn't even flinch. He just offered his hand to Lyra, his eyes never leaving her face. "I have made my choice, Your Eminence," he said, his voice steady and firm. "She is perfect." The words just hung there in the air, a direct slap in the face to 1,000 years of Cerulean tradition. Without waiting for the Emperor to argue, Rostova gently led the trembling, silent girl out of the hall, leaving a storm of outrage in his wake. In the sterile, silver hallways of the guest wing, Lyra finally found her voice. It was barely a whisper, like she was afraid the walls might be listening. "Why?" she asked, staring at the floor. "Is this some kind of human joke? Are you taking pity on the broken thing to make a point?" Rostova stopped and faced her. He'd seen that look 1,000,000 times, in the eyes of terrified recruits on their first combat drop, in refugees who'd lost it all. It was the look of someone who had learned to expect cruelty from the universe. To her, his choice couldn't be genuine. It had to be pity, or a cruel joke to mock the system, because in her world, why else would anyone ever choose her? "There's no pity in my choice, Lyra," he said softly. "When I look at you, I don't see weakness. I see stillness. I see silence." She flinched. For the Ceruleans, silence was a void, an absence of power, a total failure. Their minds were a constant symphony of psychic energy, connecting them all. Lyra's mind was quiet, a single muted note in a grand orchestra. It was the source of her shame, the very reason they called her the void-touched. "The silence is my curse," she whispered. "No," Rostova said, his voice suddenly intense, which made her finally look up. "It's your shield," he didn't explain, not yet. Over the next few days, he just spent time with her, ignoring the sneers from the court and the formal requests from the Emperor to reconsider. They walked through gardens where the plants literally sang with low-level psionic energy. As they walked, he told her about his past. He told her about the war against an enemy the rest of the galaxy only spoke of in frightened whispers. The Silent Swarm. They weren't creatures of flesh and blood, he explained, but a hive mind of pure, ravenous consciousness. It didn't break ships. It ate minds. The Alliance had thrown its most powerful telepaths against it, warriors just like the Cerulean princesses, and every single one of them was annihilated. Their power was like a lighthouse, Rostova said, his eyes distant. The brighter they shone, the faster the swarm found them. Their own strength was a dinner bell, leading the enemy right to our door. "We learned a hard lesson, Lyra. Loud isn't always strong. Sometimes loud is just a target." He taught her human strategy games like chess, which required quiet patience and calculation. He showed her the strength in waiting, in observing, in being underestimated, and slowly she began to open up like a night-blooming flower. She talked about her childhood, the confusion and terror when her psionic gifts never appeared like everyone else's. Her own people saw her as a genetic defect, a source of deep cultural shame. She was poked, prodded, studied, and eventually just cast aside. One evening, he took her to the training decks and fired up a simple Cerulean psionic amplifier. "Show me," he said. "Show me your silence." Hesitantly, she reached out with her mind. Where her sisters could create illusions of fire and force, Lyra did nothing. The energy flowing into her from the amplifier just vanished. No ripple, no feedback, nothing. To any other Cerulean, it would have looked like a catastrophic failure, but Rostova smiled. He powered on a long-range psionic sensor. "Look," he urged. On the screen, the minds of the princesses were blazing suns. But right where Lyra stood, there was a perfect sphere of absolute black. She wasn't just lacking her own energy. She was actively canceling out all the ambient psychic noise around her. She was a zone of pure, impenetrable silence. "They think you're a broken radio," Rostova said, his voice full of awe. "But you're not. You're a jammer. You're a dead zone. Against a telepathic enemy, that doesn't make you the weakest one in the room. It makes you the most dangerous." For the first time, Lyra looked at her flaw and saw a weapon. The attack didn't start with a siren or an explosion. It started with a silent wave of pure terror. Across the citadel, Ceruleans suddenly screamed and collapsed, clutching their heads. The beautiful psychic symphony of their society twisted into a screeching mess of static. The silent swarm was here. It was a ghost, an invisible predator that slipped past every physical shield they had. The royal guard, decked out in psionically charged armor, dropped to their knees, their minds being shredded from the inside. Princess Kalia, the great mind-bender, let out one final horrific mental shriek that shattered every window in the throne room before she went completely silent, her eyes vacant. Her immense power had just made her the first to be devoured. Chaos erupted. But Rostova, a veteran of this particular nightmare, was already moving. He found Lyra in the middle of the pandemonium, her face pale but her eyes perfectly clear. The psychic onslaught was washing over her like water over a stone. She was an island of calm in an ocean of mental violence. "They're here," she whispered, her voice shockingly steady. "I know," Rostova replied, snatching a pulse rifle from a fallen guard. "Can you protect us? Can you push your silence out?" She nodded, her face hardening with a resolve she'd never felt before. She closed her eyes and focused. The sphere of null energy Rostova had seen on the sensors began to expand. You could see the effort, sweat beading on her forehead. The air around them grew still, the psychic screams of the dying fading away. She pushed the bubble of silence outward. 5 meters, 10, then 20. Inside her shield, the guards who had been writhing on the floor gasped and sat up, their minds suddenly their own again. They looked around, dazed but alive. "Captain!" one of them yelled, recognizing the human who had championed the outcast. "On your feet," Rostova commanded, his voice ringing with battlefield authority. "Perimeter around her. Protect the shield." The swarm, unable to get inside their heads, started to manifest physically, shadowy, insect-like wraiths made of raw psychic energy, clawing at the edge of Lyra's sanctuary. The guards, now able to think and fight, opened fire. Rostova stood with them, calling out targets, coordinating their fire with the cold precision of a man who knew his enemy. He was the strategist, and she was the fortress. And together, they were holding back the end of the world. The fight lasted for an hour that felt like a lifetime. Lyra held the shield, a living anchor against the formless tide, while Rostova and his small band of guards fought off the monsters at its edge. Finally, the swarm's assault wavered. It had eaten the loudest, brightest minds, and faced with this unbreakable wall of silence, it simply left. It flowed back into the dark spaces between the stars. Silence returned to the citadel, but this was the silence of a graveyard, not of peace. The survivors staggered to their feet, staring at the carnage, and then they all looked at the center of it, at Lyra. She was slumped against Rostova, utterly exhausted but alive, her curse having been their only salvation. The Emperor finally emerged from his shielded panic room, his face a mask of horror and dawning understanding. He saw his fallen daughters, whose power had only made them bigger targets, and he saw the outcast, the broken girl, standing next to the human who had seen what she truly was. The court's scorn was gone, replaced by a deep, humbling awe. They weren't looking at an outcast anymore. They were looking at the shield of Cerelia. Later, in the quiet of the medical bay, Rostova sat with her. He finally told her the whole story. "The first time I fought the swarm, I lost my whole squad," he said, his voice heavy with the memory. "Our telepath. She was the strongest I'd ever known. And she was the first to die. I only survived because I hid in the psychic shadow her death left behind. In that moment of absolute horror, I found a moment of pure silence. When I saw you in that throne room, everyone else saw a flaw. I saw my salvation. I saw the only person in the entire galaxy who could stand against the dark and not get eaten alive. No one ever called her the Void Touched again. Her name became a legend, a symbol of a new kind of strength. Not the brilliant, blinding light of a supernova, but the quiet, unshakable gravity of a star that holds its ground. Her alliance with Captain Rostova, born from a deep, shared understanding instead of politics or pity, would reshape the Cerulean Empire forever. Together, they taught the galaxy a hard lesson humanity had already learned through blood and loss. The true power isn't about how bright your flame is, but about the strength of the shield that keeps the wind from blowing it out. The most valuable people aren't always the ones who shine the brightest, but the ones who can bring quiet to the storm. What did you think of Rostova's choice? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. We'd love to have you back for the next one.